Alrighty, episode 98, Uncensored Conservatism. Today we're going to take a look at Benghazi. And on the night of September 11, 2012, a group of heavily armed rebels attacked the United States consulate in Benghazi, Libya. It resulted in the death of 4 Americans, including the U.S. ambassador to Libya. The incident sparked a political firestorm and caused a controversy that played into the 2016 election. For it was out of the Benghazi investigation that the country learned that Hillary Clinton had used a private server while serving as Secretary of State. As the Libyan revolution was spiraling out of control in the aftermath of Gaddafi's ouster, John Christopher Stevens was appointed U.S. envoy to Libya in 2011, April 5th. He was tasked to reach out to the rebel forces so that something resembling a workable government could be formed. In May 2012, he officially became the ambassador to Libya and worked out of the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. On September 10th, he traveled to Benghazi. So the first major question is, what was Stevens doing in Benghazi in the first place, knowing that the security situation in Libya was deteriorating? Before the attack that killed Stevens, the State Department reports talked about the security situation in Benghazi. The U.S. compound was left unsecured and relied on local militia for protection. The morning before the attack, a local police officer was seen taking pictures of the compound. Now, previous to it, there were 2 other attacks on the compound and other attacks on facilities and diplomats. Requests from Stevens to the State Department asking for additional security and personnel went largely unignored. Guess who was Secretary of State? Now, some believe that Stevens had been sent there after the State Department received reports that rebels of the terrorist group Ansar al-Sharia, an offshoot of al-Qaeda operating in Libya, that they had Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. It was the job of Stevens to retrieve those missiles. They had ended up in the hands of the terrorist group somehow in a circuitous manner, which some people claim was an arms deal brokered by a dealer through Hillary Clinton. Clinton never intended for the missiles to end up in Libya. Instead, some Stinger missiles had ended up in Afghanistan and took down a U.S. Chinook helicopter. The missile wasn't properly armed, and the helicopter landed safely. Another missile was retrieved so that the serial number could be determined, and it was traced back to a stash of missiles kept in Qatar. In 2011, Reuters reported Obama has signed a secret directive that allowed the CIA to supply arms covertly to rebels in Libya to topple Gaddafi. The operation was dubbed Zero Footprint. The U.S. was aligning with Saudi Arabia and Qatar against Gaddafi. According to federal law, congressional leadership, known as the Gang of Eight, had to be notified. Nothing moved in and out of Libya without NATO's approval. At this time, Stevens was now the envoy to Libya. United Arab Emirates was the financier, and Qatar became the facilitator of arms movements. The key recipient of the arms flowing into Libya was Ahmed Abu Khattala, the head of Ansar al-Sharia and the insurgent commander. A year after the Benghazi attack, by the way, he became listed as a terrorist by the United States State Department. The entire operation was so secret that the commander of AFRICOM was unaware that there was a CIA annex in Benghazi. Then Obama and others used the repatriation of Bo Bergdahl in the news. He had been captured by Taliban forces in Afghanistan. The deal to get him involved was the release of 5 terrorists being held at Guantanamo Naval Base in Cuba. They were to be released directly into the custody of Qatar for at least 1 year. When some journalists started sniffing around the Qatari connection, Khattala became a problem. Mark Torrey was the man who set up the arms shipments between Qatar and Libya. Some of those weapons later ended up in Syria and Afghanistan. In 2014, Justice Department brought charges against him for illegal arms trading, but his defense was that it was at the behest of the CIA and State Department. Turry hails from Phoenix, Arizona. He has a company called Turry Defense Group, which has done millions of dollars in business. Turry's neighbor in Phoenix was Senator John McCain. The plot thickens. Another reason has some evidence behind it for why Stevens was there. It states that the Benghazi area in eastern Libya had become a major staging ground in the Middle East and northern Africa for intelligence gathering and counterterrorism efforts in the region. Now, investigative journalist Seymour Hersh has uncovered some facts that directly contradict the official public reason Stevens was in Benghazi. And they also help explain an event in Syria. And you got to follow me on this. Uh, it appeared that the so-called consulate was left lightly guarded for a reason. It was not the main operating post for the U.S. in Benghazi. That honor lay with the CIA annex a mile away, which was staffed and guarded. Now, Hersh reported that in early 2012, Obama and Turkey President Recep Erdogan had a secret meeting agreement to provide arms to Syrian rebels fighting the regime of Bashar Assad. The plan was to spirit arms out of Libya through Turkey and then into Syria. Funding was provided by Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. The CIA and Britain's MI6 were given the job of getting the weapons, which would then be moved using a series of front companies. And Hersh isn't the only one to report on these arms shipments. Christina Lamb of the Sunday Times of London reported in December 2012 that the United States has secretly been purchasing a stockpile of Libyan arms. They then spirited the weapons out of Turkey and into the hands of rebels in Syria. Stevens had a working knowledge of the entire operation, and he knew of Turkey's key role. Now, 5 days before the attack, a Libyan ship had docked in Turkey after leaving Benghazi loaded with 400 tons of weapons intended for the Syrian rebels. The man who coordinated that shipment, Abdelhakim Belhaj, was a Turkish official who had previously worked with Stevens in Libya. Stevens had arrived in Benghazi to help facilitate the removal of more SA-7 missiles from the country. That very day, the last person who visited Stevens in Benghazi was Ali Said Akin, the Turkish consul general, who was escorted by Stevens out the front gate 1 hour before the terrorist attack on the compound. Now, the forces of Bashar Assad had, on at least one occasion, used chemical weapons against rebels, particularly sarin gas. Sarin had been around since 1938 and was commonly known chemical weapon. In response to the attack, Obama had drawn his infamous line in the sand against further chemical attacks. Then on August 21st, 2013, images emerged from Syria of a chemical attack by Assad's forces. The red line in the sand had been crossed, but nothing happened. Why was there no response? There was an argument in the administration between the war hawks who wanted Obama to intervene and military experts who warned against intervening. The British came in with their intelligence service when their intelligence service received a sample of the sarin gas used in the attack in Syria, noted that it did not belong to any batches in the Syrian military arsenal. These results that the sarin gas could not be definitely traced to the Syrian military were relayed to the Pentagon. And before the attack, that chemical attack, the military was growing concerned about the role Syria's neighbors were playing in the civil war, particularly Turkey. Erdogan was known as a supporter of the al-Nusra Front in Syria, a jihadist faction. The military officials believed a sarin attack on Syria instigated by Erdogan would draw fire down upon Assad and force Obama to enforce his line in the sand, thus tipping the scales. A Russian source had delivered a sample of the sarin gas to British authorities. The primary intelligence agency at the forefront of determining the source of the gas was the Defense Intelligence Agency, then headed by Michael Flynn. It was he who insisted that Assad would not have carried out a chemical attack because they were winning the battle against the rebels, and to do so would risk U.S. military information. They also fed a story to the press at White House Chief of Staff McDonough and Obama had a long walk in the Rose Garden and decided against an attack, fearing the Middle East would go up in smoke or something. Anyway, this is John Kerry. On September 9th, he was asked if Assad could do anything to stop a U.S. response. He says that basically nothing, but then a deal was brokered by Vladimir Putin where Assad would relinquish his chemical stockpile. By accepting the Russian offer, Obama saves face. role of Turkey can't be overlooked here. By the end of 2012, the intelligence consensus was that the rebels were losing the war. The intelligence community learned in the spring of 2013 that elements of Turkish intelligence were working with the al-Nusra Front to get chemical weapons. In that meeting with Obama, he didn't leave empty-handed. Obama allowed Turkey to circumvent his own executive order prohibiting the export of gold to Iran. In March 2012, the EU placed sanctions on Iranian banks, which curtailed Iran's ability to conduct foreign trade. The U.S. followed suit, but allowed the shipment of gold to private Iranian entities. The decision to end the arms gravy train out of Libya after Benghazi left Erdogan politically exposed. The only avenue of support for the rebels was Turkey, since the train out of Jordan prohibited it, and getting arms through the lawless Lebanese valleys was troublesome. Erdogan's dream of a client state in Syria was evaporating, and he knew that if the al-Nusra Front was to be defeated, they were going to turn on him. Now back to Benghazi on September 11, 2012. Stevens met with his Turkish counterpart, who departed the compound around 8:30. At 9:40, about 150 heavily armed militia assembled at the compound and began the attack. Within 20 minutes, they had reached the mission's walls and headed for the ambassador's residence. Stevens was escorted by security agent Sean Smith to a secure room. At 1:15, a rescue team arrived, and Hillary Clinton was informed that all personnel have to be evacuated from Benghazi. Believing that they have Stevens, the film later emerges at 2 a.m. of the insurgents dragging Stevens from the compound. They still believe he's alive. 2 hours later, the attack on the CIA annex began, killing another 2 Americans. When Ty Woods arrived at the compound with his team, they recovered the body of Sean Smith, but Stevens was nowhere to be found. The insurgents had taken his body to a hospital controlled by Ansar al-Sharia. Now, as Stevens and Smith were holed up in a special safe room, an unarmed drone arrived over the scene. At AFRICOM, General Carter Ham, shown here, prepared an emergency response team but was told to stand down. The administration said there were no military assets in the area. Right, not really, because there were 2 squadrons of armed and ready F-16Cs at Aviano Air Force Base in Italy. If those jets had left at 1:10 a.m., they would have reached Benghazi within 40 minutes and at least thwarted the second attack, which was on the CIA annex. Further, it became very apparent on the morning of 9/11/2012. Sean Smith had written a memo detailing the lack of security with the ominous message, assuming I don't die tonight. He was the one who observed a Libyan police officer taking pictures of the compound. Now, the CIA had agreed with the February 17th Brigade, a Libyan rebel faction, to form a rapid reaction team, but when the actual emergency came about, they failed to act. They obstructed rescue efforts by setting up checkpoints. Anyway. Iran had allied itself with Assad in Syria, and they were aware of the CIA-directed arms shipments funneled through Benghazi, then Turkey, and finally Syria, to the Syrian rebels. Qasem Soleimani, head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, had hatched a scheme to break up the Benghazi operation by kidnapping Stevens. To oversee the operation, he picked Ibrahim Mohammed Jodaki and Khalil Harb, a Hezbollah operative. Harb had previously worked with Sunni rebels in the area during the Libyan civil war and had a force of about 50 people. Iran continuously used Arab operatives to recruit over 1,000 Libyans into the militias. In August, while in Dubai, Iranian official Ali Akbar Valaita, a key advisor to Iranian leadership, warned Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett that the Quds Force was becoming a rogue operation and that they planned to kidnap an American diplomat. Responding to the situation on the ground, Stevens pleaded for more security on August 2nd. 3 weeks later, Harb transferred $8 to $10 million in euros to Ansar al-Sharia militia. It's also known that the Ayatollah Masbah Yazdi, a cleric closely associated with Ahmadinejad, issued a fatwa calling for the death of Stevens. And the role of Sidney Blumenthal cannot be overlooked, as he was providing intelligence to Clinton before and after Benghazi in Libya. Hillary Clinton was using Blumenthal and his friends Ty Drumheller and Cody Shearer, this is Cody Shearer, as a secret private de facto intelligence gathering operation in Libya and elsewhere. Many of the emails sent to Clinton from Libya by Blumenthal outlined projects Blumenthal was involved in, from providing military training for rebels to touting a Libyan businessman named Najib Obaida as important to the economic success of a future Libya. Most importantly, he promoted a deal sought by a U.S. defense contractor, Osprey Global Solutions. Obviously, Blumenthal had a financial stake. According to the results of many investigations in the wake of the Benghazi attack, we know that Leon Panetta, who had moved on to become Secretary of Defense after leaving the CIA, ordered U.S. forces to be deployed to Benghazi. The assets were mobilized to a staging area in Italy, but sat there and were never deployed. The reason later emerged. Libyan officials became concerned about the dress of any U.S. rescuers. During a 2-hour meeting while the attack took place, the State Department wasted time insisting that U.S. military personnel respond in civilian clothes. Now, after the attack, officials in the administration espoused the view that the attacks arose out of a spontaneous. They were spontaneous. They cited an anti-Muslim movie called Innocence of the Muslims by an Egyptian-American filmmaker. There had been protests in Cairo the previous day where marchers descended on the U.S. Embassy, but there was no substantiated evidence of similar protests in Benghazi. The day after the attack, Blumenthal sent Clinton an email that blamed the video. She sent that email on to Jake Sullivan, but a day later, he sent a memo stating that Ansar al-Sharia had planned the attack for over a month, but used the protests as a cover, which contradicted the original official White House statements. UN Ambassador Susan Rice was the administration's point person who carried the excuse of the video to the public. A political nightmare for Obama 2 months before the election of 2012 had occurred, and for Hillary Clinton, whom everyone assumed would run in 2016. Despite those questions, they lasted into 2014 when Republicans formed the House Select Committee on Benghazi in May 2014 to examine government policies related to the attack. As the State Department responded to requests for documents, it was discovered that Clinton's State Department email account had no correspondence. The State Department then requested that she turn over emails from her private server made while she was Secretary of State. Of the 50,000 pages of emails turned over 900 referred to Libya. Thus began the saga of Hillary Clinton's private email server and the controversy surrounding its use and the eventual 30,000 missing emails. According to some sources, Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch funded a research project on encrypted dark web messages, which showed some emails on our private server were actually intercepted by Russian intelligence. In 2016, Fitton claimed the evidence was passed on to Peter Strzok at the FBI. We'll meet a lot of him later. Nobody knows whatever became of that evidence. The war in Libya was sold as by the Obama administration as a struggle for human rights to save the Libyan people from Gaddafi. But today there's not a scintilla of evidence to suggest such a crisis was at hand before or after NATO intervened in Libya and before Gaddafi met his fate by being sodomized with a bayonet and then hacked to death. Figures like Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Samantha Power, and Sidney Blumenthal promoted the war as striking a blow for democratic change. During her final 11-hour marathon testimony before Congress, where she delivered her infamous "What difference does it make?" screed, she emerged victorious in the eyes of a fawning press. Here, some said, was a presidential candidate dragged before a congressional committee under hot spotlights, while in the spotlight of a campaign, no less. She delivered, they declare. The poor put-upon victim of the vast right-wing conspiracy has survived unscathed. But now there's hearings on that last day of testimony. We learned that Hillary Clinton set up a private email server and used it for State Department business and then deleted pertinent emails for purely political reasons. We discovered, thanks to the emails released by Guccifer, that Clinton was behind the instigation of U.S. involvement in a war in Libya where no American interests were at stake for, at best, political reasons. She chortled and paraphrased Caesar while the country descended into chaos, overrun by terrorist groups, then sat back and did nothing for political purposes. Actually, she did one thing. She ran for president in 2016. Makes you wonder. And that's it for today. Thanks. Have a pleasant tomorrow.